If you ever want to feel like mankind has existed for way too long and repeated way too much history on its way there, know that we just passed through the fourth big spike in interest for stereoscopic 3D. This tends to happen every 30 years. Even though Nvidia's high-tech new shutter glasses required a newfangled cutting-edge 120Hz 3D monitor, they're using a method that was also used in the 1920s. In 2011, Nvidia's 3D Vision 2 improved on their shutter glasses from 2009, but the golden age of this technology burned out so quickly over the following 2 years that playing with it 5 years later feels like experiencing a historical period piece from a period that wasn't that long ago. As it turns out, Nvidia is still selling these things for $120, but full disclosure, this one was lent to me by my good friend Kowloon. What's inside is a USB IR emitter, the appropriate cable, and a pair of glasses that have an on button and need to be plugged into the wall to charge. The reason these glasses need power is because they rapidly shutter open and closed for the right and left eyes, having your two eyes interpret two separate images together to judge the qualities that make us so rotund.
My stomach sticks way out in front and my...
With a lot of elbow grease and a little tolerance for eye strain, you can make ghastly transparent images kinda sorta seep out of the screen before your very eyes. And while the effect is neat, I now understand why this stuff didn't latch onto gaming super hard and why public interest in it is always so fleeting. For gaming in particular, you've got performance issues, setup and troubleshooting issues, and art design and programming issues that might make it borderline impossible to recommend that one's first playthrough of any game be in 3D. But for the games who you know already that you've played before, that's what this is for. In those cases, it's at least a fun toy to play with. The results vary per game, but stereoscopic 3D seems better at conveying depth away from the viewer rather than giving the illusion that stuff is getting closer to the viewer. But that's because Nvidia hides away a super important setting called convergence, which is what you want to be tinkering with, even though they shove it below the advanced options, lock it out of a few games, and don't tell you about a button combo that lets you adjust convergence with the hardware. Reason being is that once you do start tinkering with convergence, you really do get $120 worth of effects, but at that level you also start to break things like heads-up displays and crosshairs. But what makes even getting there confusing is that Nvidia's own terminology for those two variables is kinda misleading. Their depth value, in practice, determines how far apart the two eyes' images are from each other. Their convergence value rotates each eye's angle to change the point where they intersect, so playing with that one ends up determining the depth of the illusion better than playing with the depth value. So not only do you have to calibrate two values that can affect each other at certain levels, but you also have to make sure that the game's instructions are telling it to place things like HUDs, crosshairs, and sometimes particle effects in certain models at the right distance, which is determined by a stereoscopic profile created by Nvidia, the game's developers, or modders. And in addition to that, there are still more organic, unchangeable depth cues determined by a game's style and its use of its camera, and all of those factors have to be juggled with a legitimate physiological learning curve. It takes time for your eyeballs to adjust to viewing a 3D image, a fact that Nvidia is fully aware of as it suggests you start with the depth set to low and gradually ramp it up as you play. And while you're doing that, you might feel your eyeball move in ways you don't usually feel it move. Once you do have a compatible game up and running in 3D, then wait a few seconds to adjust, then gradually ramp the depth all the way up, then wait a few seconds to adjust, then ramp the convergence way the hell up, and then wait a few seconds to adjust, suddenly it feels like you're looking at a tiny low-poly dollhouse of the action through a window, the window being your monitor. This sense of scale here creates an effect called toyification that's widely documented by the community. Viewing a 3D set of life-size action scaled down small enough to fit inside a 20-something inch monitor ends up making everything look like adorable little toys moving around back there. And it's dazzling. It truly does give the impression that you're looking at a whole new world through your monitor, but it's not exactly a convincing one. Or a very playable one. Smushing two slightly different angles into one makes low-poly sharp edges stick out harder, same deal with jaggies. The lack of any kind of head tracking mechanism means that the image weirdly distorts when you move your head, and the slightly brownish tint to the glasses means you have to calibrate your screen's colors to compensate, but it's still gonna at least slightly make everything look like the color of old paper. Or MGS4. Speaking of games that are older than they seem, the lineup of Nvidia 3D Vision Ready games is surprisingly small, and something that has it feeling like a period piece relic despite being less than a decade old. You've got the basic AAA headliners from the 2009 to 2012 window when Nvidia was pushing this thing, and then there's just nothing. For that matter, a lot of games listed are disposable, one-and-done single-player campaigns that don't exactly live on to 2016 with a lot of replay value. At the time of setup, Battlefield Bad Company 2 was the only Nvidia 3D-ready stamped game I happened to have installed. It was easily the best demo of the concept, and also proof that some games, as few and far between as they are, can do crosshairs good in 3D, although the HUD is still a problem. Of all the FPS games I did test out, this was the only one to keep your crosshairs accurate, no matter what you set depth or convergence to. A lot of FPS games ended up making 2 frames with 2 entirely different crosshair placements, a problem that Nvidia tries to fix with a more reliable, but not completely reliable, crosshair overlay of their own. Believe it or not, Batman Arkham City was much more mild on the 3D. You've got some mild pop-out effects that you can always test out with the snow, but some genuinely hard-hitting use of depth really only comes into play when you're doing that high-speed swinging, hinting at the kind of 3D vertigo that Oculus's later VR demos happily exploit. Except there's one problem. Once I reach a good balance of depth and conversion here, HUD prompts don't display correctly. Metro 2033 is the first game that I found myself playing differently because of 3D. Stuff that would have just rustled an old raise of the eyebrow turned into real jump scares thanks to this one little bit of extra immersion. In fact, Metro, especially because of its HUDlessness, might be the best experience I had with 3D vision, but a lot of that result might have just been a lucky coincidence with its art style. There's tons of clutter in this game, and it gives the viewer ample and diverse depth cues, none of which conflict with an on-screen HUD. You've got dust and cobwebs right in your face for pop-out, and tons of short vertical obstacles shrinking into the distance for pop-in. Every frame of this game is just full of depth meters. But just like Batman, once I get it looking that good, you start seeing double on the 2D elements. Which is sad because this is a game where you're likely to have subtitles on. Trying out Tomb Raider 2013 gave me the same problem. I just couldn't change focus from a flat HUD spray painted on my window and then dupe my eyes back into focusing on something behind the window. Playability ultimately suffers from the second it takes to readjust focus, and in just most about every game with some kind of HUD, you're gonna want to use that second to adjust your focus on and off the HUD. And each time you do it, some portion of the screen turns into a mess. Here's an example. Try focusing on the dust on a window. If you see the dust up close and clear, you can't see what's behind the window. If you focus on what's behind the window, you can't see the dust. So imagine the dust is a HUD, and instead of the stuff behind the dust turning into a pleasantly blurred background, it instead turns into this messy double vision drunk simulator every time you switch focus. So it takes about a full goddamn second just to glance at the minimap for your motion mind pings. Sure, you could slide the HUD backwards away from the screen, but the HUD's placement at the border of the screen would have to change too, or else that would be a conflicting depth cue. But shrink it and center it further into the frame and it's covering up the action. You just can't win. Speaking of inevitable defeatism, official Nvidia 3D vision support died around late 2013. That's when Nvidia stopped making their own stereoscopic profiles for games. Now, that's a job up to the whims of the developers. So once you stop playing 2011's greatest hits, your mileage varies considerably. It does try valiantly to hook into any direct 3D program, but that means OpenGL games like Minecraft and Doom require community patching. But even when it's working, a lot of games try to fight a third-party program tinkering with its camera views. So enter the Helix mod, a long list of community fixes for most exceptions on Nvidia's list, except for 2 of the biggest multiplayer shooters around right now. Rainbow Six Siege requires me to do the compatibility mode method of getting this to work, by installing a third-party app called the Nvidia Inspector that fools your driver profiles into thinking you're playing Assassin's Creed Unity instead. But none of the other ones, just Unity. The Unity pick wasn't even documented online anywhere either, I just got lucky. It looks great in 3D, almost as good an effect as Metro, but you get this strange blur around guns, which was the same problem I was also having in Overwatch. That is, after finding out it doesn't work at all out of the box, so then having to download the stuff for compatibility mode, and then fixing it with the in-game super sampling option, which finally makes Overwatch play in 3D completely bug-free and beautiful, like it's all hunky-dory. But that's not hunky-dory. The fact that it can work fine in 3D, but the forces at play don't want it to, shows just how little industry interest there is in supporting this feature. Although most big Hollywood movies have a 3D version, 3D TV is on the way out. Samsung's pulling the plug this year. Only a baker's dozen of games have 3D support on the PS4 and zilch for the Xbox One. And playing a lot of games in 3D over a couple weeks for PC has clued me into why. It's a lot of hassle for not a lot of reward. You're ultimately still looking at a flat pane of action on a rectangle. Anything popping in or out still conforms to the same perimeters of the screen. Imagine playing Superhot in 3D, on a monitor with the mouse and keyboard. Bullets fly out, only a bit though, but a lot of items sink in. It's neat, but the game doesn't play any differently. But now imagine playing Superhot in VR. And you can probably understand why the industry is looking elsewhere for the next big thing.